Not that long ago, I did this science experiment and watched the DCEU in chronological order to see if it changed my experience in any way, and I'm excited to share with you my results. Welcome to Durbania. I'm Durbin, and like I said, not that long ago, I went back and watched the DCEU films in chronological order to see if it changed their impact in any way, shape, or form. A little while back, before Avengers Infinity War, I did this experiment with the MCU. Now, of course, 20 movies now, about 18 then, with Infinity War being the 19th. That is a ton of movies to go through, but I went through the MCU in chronological order, and it was incredibly interesting. It explained in certain places where were the Avengers, what was happening during the time frame of some of these things, and I thought, well, that's interesting. So the DCEU only has like 5 movies, so it'll take a fraction of the time to do that experiment and do that in chronological order. How will that change things? So I'm beyond excited to talk about that and talk about these results. So, watching the DCEU in chronological order, it begins with Wonder Woman, which I think is an incredibly strong opening for this. Now, for this experiment, this is what I had to do in my mind. In my mind, I had to pretend like there was no DCEU movies, and this was the actual order in which they were released. So I also kind of pretended that little opening and closing segments in Wonder Woman where she is in modern day emailing Bruce Wayne, kind of had to pretend those two things didn't exist and just kind of watch it within that world of 100 years ago during World War I and Wonder Woman and all that stuff. And I have to tell you, number one, it's an incredibly strong opening for the DCEU. And it's interesting because Wonder Woman is so bright, especially on Themyscira and their island, and it's just so bright, it's so beautiful, and it's so awesome. And so it opens the DCEU with that element of brightness and with that element of hope. Plus, we get into Diana's, this bubble through which she sees life. Now, she is literally living in a bubble. Probably for thousands of years is what I'm guessing. And so in her mind, since she was a little girl, it has been ingrained in her that men are inherently good, not evil, because Zeus made them good, passionate creatures, and it was Ares that perverted that. It was Ares that under his spell makes them evil. So men of themselves are good. So we never know when Ares is going to come back. So she has this bubble that she's been living in this entire time while literally living in a bubble. But what's really interesting then, so the DCEU is criticized a lot for its darkness and stuff like that, but what's interesting with Wonder Woman is we open with a balance. We get the bright, beautiful Themyscira, then we move into London.
Welcome to jolly old London.
It's hideous.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
So we move from the brightness into the darkness. We get a moving from one tone to the next, and we get to follow with it so it doesn't feel jarring. So it's really cool to open the DCEU that way because it walks you into that darker tone in a way that makes sense and feels natural. And then what's really interesting when you get to the end of Wonder Woman. So the end of Wonder Woman is where Diana's it's when her bubble gets bursted. See what I did there? Bubble and burble. I made a new word. But it's when her bubble gets bursted because she thinks the war to end all wars is happening because of Ares and a spell that he's put over them. Now, when she kills the real Ares, you look and you see there are some people where the spell is broken. Like some people were under a spell. But to me, it's very theological because it's like the devil. Does the devil make people evil? No. Evil exists in mankind. He just knows how to put hooks in it, pull it out, and manipulate it, which is the same thing with Ares. Did he make mankind evil? No. It's not just one bad guy that made all evil. Mankind had evil in them, but with Ares' spell, he was putting hooks in that evil and kind of pulling it out and manipulating it. But nonetheless, man is still man, and man has evil in their hearts. And that was a huge bubble or burble burst for Diana, where it was just like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I mean, you really got to think about how big of a burst of a bubble this is, because she's been living in her bubble for, again, thousands of years? For thousands of years, she has believed a certain way, and in the space of a few short days, her entire world crashed. Steve Trevor, the love of her life, dies. And She's in pain and she's in mourning of coming to the realization of the truth. And so with the bubble being bursted and with kind of that pain she's feeling, we descend a little bit more into the darkness and the grittiness of DC, because it's kind of like she loses a little bit of hope by the end of Wonder Woman.
He'll be an outcast. I'll kill him.
How? He'll be a god to them.
From there, the baton gets passed to Man of Steel. Now, Man of Steel picks up dark and gritty. Really, in terms of tone, it almost picks up where Wonder Woman leaves off. Where Wonder Woman has lost a chunk of hope, we now have Clark Kent growing up in a world that he doesn't fit in. And so he spends this movie, the whole beginning, in a state of fear. He kind of spins it in a state of darkness. Why? Because if he shakes somebody's hand the wrong way, he could rip their arm off their body. You know, in other Superman lore, and I assume it's true in Man of Steel, he wants to play football. But he can't, because if he's on a team, that's no longer fair anymore. So he can't even do the one thing for joy and pleasure that he wants to do, and that is play football. He is truly in a cardboard world. He is a Man of Steel in a world of cardboard, and he can't find his place in this world. Kind of like Diana. She came into the world naive, thinking, yes, my place is to defeat Ares, and by the end of it, she feels like she kind of lost her place in the world. We get into Clark Kent now, who is trying to find his place in the world. So a common theme where we started bright and kind of descended a little bit into the darkness and the grittiness, and now here we are in the darkness and grittiness, and throughout Man of Steel, we're trying to ascend back up, like when Clark Kent meets Jor-El and learns the S is not an S, but it's the Kryptonian symbol for hope of the House of El. So it's about finding that hope again. And in his battle with Zod and in saving the world, he does truly find that hope again. Yes, he has to kill Zod, but you know what? And in Superman 2, it's so hokey we don't even realize that first he strips Zod of his power and makes him hopeless. Second, he breaks every bone in Zod's hand and tortures him. And then finally, puts him out of his misery when he kills him. But it's so cornball that we don't even notice that. So I think Superman 2, and that scene where he kills Zod, is a million times more darker than Superman having to kill Zod, because he has no other choice left to him, and he hates the fact that he had to make that choice, and now he falls on his knees and he cries out that he had to do it. He mourned over the fact that he had to take out one of his enemies. Can you tell I'm just a tad bit passionate about that? But when you get to the end and he's talking to his mom at his dad's gravestone, and he's talking about getting a job where he could run into danger with nobody looking twice, it's him talking about how he's found his calling. Finding his calling is him finding hope. He has found his place in this world to be the Superman, to help people. He has found that place where he can contribute to the world that has adopted him and has become his home. So Wonder Woman is bright, descends into some darker and grittiness, and kind of ends with a little bit of a loss of hope or disillusionment. Whereas Man of Steel picks up there and builds ourselves back up to finding some hope. Now, Man of Steel still doesn't get any brighter. That's because we get into our third film in this DCEU trilogy now, Batman vs. Superman. So Wonder Woman was the setup of Wonder Woman. Man of Steel is the setup of Superman. So Batman vs. Superman is primarily the setup of Batman. So when you dive into this Batman, already we see in the beginning he's in a lot of pain because whoever Jack is in that building gets killed, and for whatever reason, this has impact on him. That's why I wish it was like Lucius Fox or somebody in that building, because then there could be a bit more of a connection for us, the audience, but I digress. What we're really supposed to get out of that is all that death, dismay, and destruction in Metropolis, and that final fight impacted him. And it impacted him because of the death and destruction he's seen all of his life. The death of his parents as a kid, watching them get shot in front of him. We see the Robin suit that says, ha ha ha, joke's on you. We know there's a dead Robin. And so if it's anything similar to the Jason Todd story, where Joker catches Robin, tortures him to taunt Batman, and then kills him, and I know it's like come out that, you know, Snyder meant that to be Dick Grayson, but if it's anything similar to that storyline, that was a horrendous thing for Batman. So there's little clues and Easter eggs to show us that over the years, he's been beaten down and bruised. So he probably started like a Wonder Woman and started like a Superman. He probably started with hope. He probably started with the I'm not going to let what happened to me happen to anybody else, and had his one rule, which is what makes Batman so dynamic. He'll get out there and beat the living tar out of people, but he won't kill, because if he kills, then he's descended to their level and he's just become part of the problem instead of part of the solution. Herein lies the most interesting part of watching the DCEU in chronological order. What we've done is create the DC Trinity and then brought them all to the same point in their journey. You have Man of Steel happy that he's finally found his place in the world, but now the world really fears him. And now it's about his story arc and how to deal with that. It continues the story arc of Wonder Woman, who has been disillusioned and is in pain, but finding her reason to get back into the game and fight again. And then you have the story arc of Batman, who's been beaten down and bruised and like almost his conscience destroyed, but now about him finding that hope. Really, it's about the DC Trinity encountering the dark nights of their souls and having to overcome. And then you have Lex Luthor bringing it full circle, acting like Ares. He didn't create the fear in mankind towards Superman, but what he did do was manipulate the fear and the darkness that was there. So we have another interesting story arc, not with Lex Luthor, but we have the people. The people who fear Superman and Lex Luthor manipulating that fear, that wherever Superman goes, there's destruction. So that's what they're conditioned to see, and they're conditioned to fear Superman. So now they don't look at the good he's doing and the heroic, they're looking at the problem of somebody with all this power existing. And so mankind kind of has a story arc, because when Superman dies, saving the world from doomsday, well, now the problem's dealt with. There's no Superman in the world. So now that that fear is taken care of, they can kind of see the good that he did and that he laid down his life defending them. So it's really about three heroes encountering their darkness and having to fight that and overcome it in themselves. Batman overcoming his blinding rage, Superman dealing with a crisis in identity. Am I the cause for all this trouble? Do I really belong in this world? Wonder Woman finding her place in the fight again. It's kind of interesting to see three heroes brought to this point and on the same journey together. Then you got Suicide Squad. I didn't watch it. About halfway through Batman vs. Superman, I made the decision that I don't need to watch this movie. It literally contributes nothing to this storyline whatsoever. And then lastly, we get to Justice League in this chronological order. And you know what happens when you watch Justice League in this order? It sticks out as a freaking sore thumb. It does not fit in this franchise at all whatsoever. There is a theme where you can see Batman embracing the light and rejecting the darkness, and you can sort of see that carry through in this. But what really happens is you see that Wonder Woman, Man of Steel, and BVS all have a character. And throughout this trilogy, there is sort of this character arc. Justice League has no character. It's just as bland as its villain. So Steppenwolf is so bland and so personalityless. That's a weird word, but he has no personality whatsoever. I dislike Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, but at least he had a personality. He gave me something to react to. He had character. Steppenwolf does not. And so the movie has no real feel and no real character. What would have made Justice League fit is if it really was the end bookmark here on this series. While Wonder Woman started light and went dark, then we needed Justice League to pick up with the darkness of BVS and start dark and move to the light that we had at the beginning of Wonder Woman. And we didn't have that. The total difference and lack of tone shows up when you watch all of these movies close together and back to back to back in chronological order. Now, as a standalone movie, like thinking of it as like just some sort of, independent DC animated film, it's actually pretty good. Following what we've been going through, it doesn't fit at all, and that makes me sad. It really makes me sad. So it made me like that movie just a little bit less. So that's my experiment. The results, it overall makes the experience better to watch Wonder Woman, Man of Steel, and BVS back to back to back in chronological order. It kind of improves the quality of it and improves the experience of it. However, it makes Justice League 10 times worse and kind of highlights how Suicide Squad is just, what? It just contributes nothing to that storyline or anything. So it kind of highlights the two misfits, but at the same time, it makes those core three better. Again, though, that's only my opinion. Have you tried that, watching all the DCEU films in chronological order? What were your results? Were they different than mine? Let's talk about it in the comments. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button to become a Durbanian and hit the bell by the subscribe button so you're notified for my next ranking video or video like this or a movie review or anything else I do here. I'm Durbin. Thanks for checking out Durbania.